And so the question then is, if I do return my tithe, how do I return it and where does it go? Well, again, the Old Testament has a couple of things to say about this. In Malachi, we hear this idea of returning the tithe to the storehouse. And in our context, it looks a little bit different to what it did in the Old Testament. And so we return our tithe to the church, who passes it on to the local conference, because the local conference are the one who employ our pastors. The local conference then passes a small percentage on to the various other levels of the church as a way of advancing the work of mission and ministry, not only just at local conference level, but across Australia, across the South Pacific Division, and across the world. So some ask, what is the difference between tithes and offerings? Well, as I mentioned earlier, tithe is something that we return, that the Bible instructs us to do 10% as a recognition of what God has done for us. Whereas offerings are this idea of a generous response to what God is doing in our lives. They can be for specific purposes, they can be for specific initiatives or mission or ministries, or various different things that are happening all over Australia and around the globe. And offerings are really not determined by a percentage. Some people choose to allocate a percentage for their offerings and for their generosity. Both, though, are importantly an act of worship, an act and a response to what God has done in our lives. And so people ask, should I be giving both? Well, should is really the wrong question, because stewardship is so much bigger than just this idea of should. But I would encourage you to prayerfully consider, both tithe and offering. Tithe has this obedience component, because Scripture talks about, the necessity of being obedient to God in returning tithe. But offerings are really a heart response, and so there's so much more to it than that. And I encourage you to prayerfully consider how you want to respond to what God has done in your life, because there is so much blessing that can come from being generous. Because generosity recognizes that we trust God with every aspect of our lives, and we trust Him because everything comes from Him.